Hey up everybody, my name's Joshua Morrison, director of Johnny Moz's Lessons in Confidence, and today I want to talk a little bit about our lives as individuals and how all the little stories that take us from the moment that we're born to the moment where we are today are kind of what makes us who we are. And it's very easy to forget a lot of the most interesting sort of things that have happened to you because it's just not quite relevant to the you that is around now, right? So lately I've been kind of a little bit down in the dumps just because I've been thinking about my own life and thinking about what's taken me from my past to my present and thinking it's just not good enough, it's just not, interesting enough, right? And because I go down to the pub, right, for instance, and I get talking to like some old Gary, right, who's like 70 years old, and he's telling me various stories from when he was my age, right? And I hear stuff like, when I was your age, I used to knit motorcycles in Italy, or like when I was your age, I got kicked out of Spain and I had to come back and live with my parents for a little bit. And it's like, how the fuck did you get kicked out of Spain? And it's like, well, I did some mad shit over there. And it's like, why wasn't I doing any of this? All I did when I was sort of 17, 18, 19 was I went to a few different friends' houses and we just got some beers in and we just sort of drunk, or sometimes we go to the Wetherspoons and then we'd get sick of that and then go back to one of the mates' houses and get some beers and just drink there and just like, put on some music for one another, watch a few like dumb videos and stuff like that, stay up until about midnight and then go home. And I was that friend that lived a little bit further away, so everyone else only had to really go like 20 minutes back, maybe get like one bus or just walk for like 20, 30 minutes. I had to walk for 20 minutes and then get a bus for like 45 minutes and then walk another 20 minutes after that. So I don't know, I was always kind of a little bit wanting to go because I wanted to get that journey out of the way, right? And so a lot of different things were kind of going on in my head lately, just sort of trying to recall all the various mad things that have happened to me, right? And I was really struggling to think of them, right? Really, really struggling. I tried to think of some, and there was stuff like, I saw a car crash up north, right? Like live on the scene, like there was still like smoke coming out of the car, and like we saw them, like, because the car had full on turned over, and we saw them kind of climbing out, and I saw the guy look at me in the eyes as he was sort of like really not in a good state, and I remember looking him in the eyes and thinking, I don't even want to blink, because if I blink or if I look away, I felt like I was giving him my life force, you know what I mean? So that was the first sort of mad thing that happened, and then I started thinking, well, there's been a couple New Year's parties that have been kind of mad, we stay out. But even then, it's not even that mad. We stay out until about 2 in the morning and then, drunkenly gallop along the street doing stupid shit and shouting and stuff. And then just went home and went to bed. And that was kind of about as far as it went. And I thought, that makes me less of a person. And obviously that's not true. Obviously it doesn't make me less of a person because I didn't have because I didn't get kicked out of fucking Spain, or because I didn't steal a motorcycle. Like, there's those kind of things where you're getting yourself down by comparing your life story to someone else's life story, right? And, if you're trying to find the most interesting life that you can have, someone out there will have a more interesting life than you. Say if I had gotten kicked out of Spain, then I would be comparing myself to someone who, I don't know, went to space or whatever, There's people that fought in Afghanistan, they've got loads of stories from that, I'm not saying that the war in Afghanistan was a good thing, but I'm saying that, the soldiers that went there and then they come back, they've got some mad stories to tell. But obviously, those mad stories are curated by the individual veteran, right? Because they don't really want to bring up their PTSD or whatever. They don't want to get super into that because that just brings everybody down. So they've found some fun ways of, getting their stories out there, some entertaining little anecdotes, right? And, anytime that you hear a story from someone or you're telling a story, there's all sorts of little extra details that don't really need to be, added on. Like, a lot of my stories, you could add in the existential crisis that was sitting in the back of my mind as I was on the bus there, thinking, oh God, what's wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. But no one really wants to hear that. No one wants all that stuff. They want to hear the fun stuff, the entertaining bits, and you deliver them when you're telling an anecdote, right? So I was reading through my old journal, right? And I found an entry from 2019, which it goes into this little story of, I went to see my mates, right? And we were in Portobello Market or something like that. We went to a chip shop and we're sat outside the chip shop eating our chips. I'd ordered my chips first, and I was out there, because everyone else got like fish and stuff like that, which needs a little bit of extra time to cook and stuff, right? So I just got chips because it's just cheaper. And I went out and I had my chips, and by the time I'd finished my chips, everyone else was coming out to eat their chips. And across the street, there was this huge crowd of people all sitting around murmuring and talking amongst themselves, and they were all dressed quite interestingly. You know, they all had sort of interesting little fashions going on, a little bit sort of hippie-ish sort of looks to them. And I was feeling, that's kind of interesting, what's going on with them? And the building that they were in front of was leaking this really avant-garde acid jazz. And I thought, this is really interesting what's going on here. I'd like to know what's going on. And so I asked my mate to roll me up a cigarette, right? And he did, and then he went to give me a lighter, and I was like, no, don't give me a lighter. Don't give me a lighter, watch. And so I got up and I went into the crowd, and I just sort of went around asking people for lighters, right? And eventually I found someone who gave me a lighter, and because I've gone, hey, can I get a lighter, right? That's an easy in to any conversation with anyone that's also smoking, right? So I asked them for a lighter, they give me a lighter, and then I kind of, you know, try and go like, oh, what's going on here? What's all this about? This looks quite interesting. And they were like, oh, it's a book launch. There's this guy over there. He's launching a book, and it's like this poetry book, right? And so I went and talked to a couple other people and basically got the same thing. It's just like, oh, there's a poetry book. And all I knew about this poetry book was apparently the poetry was really, really good, right? Eventually I got talking to the actual author of the book, and we sort of had a bit of a conversation. He seemed like a nice enough guy, right? And I asked him, you know, what was the sort of mentality behind some of these sort of poems? And he was kind of like, you know, I was kind of, you know, coming from a sort of depressive sort of background, and like I was dealing with a lot, and this was my way of like self-therapizing myself. And I thought that's interesting enough. And a lot of the poems kind of played with the form. Like there was one that was all about like scattered memories, and the words were all kind of scattered across the page in a weird order, stuff like that. Or like, I'm going in circles, and the poem was done in a spiral, like this is the first sentence and then this is the second, and so on and so forth, right, in a little circle until it gets to the middle. And there was stuff like that, and the poetry book was quite fun. And so then I went into the building, and there were more people sort of chatting and having a bit of a nice time. And this live acid jazz band was playing, and when you're up close, the music was really powerful, really good, but at the same time really like not, you know, invasive to the mind. That you could still think while still having your senses not necessarily overloaded, but loaded to the perfect level. And then you go into the back, and there was these long table with just crates and crates of beer and wine on it, right? And I was like, oh, brilliant. So I picked up one of the beers, and I had a look around, and someone sort of nodded at me in a way like, oh, you're gonna have that beer? Yeah, okay. So I popped it open, started drinking it, and I just sort of sat on this table. And so I called my mates on the phone and said, come in here, it's fucking brilliant in here. And they came in, and we just sat there talking to various like poets and artists and other like artiste sort of people, right? While we're drinking all this wine and all this beer and having a lovely little time listening to this acid jazz, and people would come over and ask like, oh, how are you doing? How do you know the author? And I'd be like, I don't actually know the author, I just sort of turned up, but I really respect his work, that kind of thing. Because I did find it interesting, even though the poetry wasn't my kind of thing, it was a little bit soppy for my taste. I did find the way that he was playing with the form quite fun, right? And so we were sat there, and people were coming out of this little like back kitchen area, right? And me and my mates were just sat there having like these long conversations, getting wasted on all this free wine, right? And we end up leaving, right? Quite inebriated, right? And we're walking down the street, and I say to my mate, there's these two people that are walking up dead ahead that are nothing to do with this, you know, book launch that I've just been talking about. And I say to my mate, I bet I can shake both of their hands, right? And he was like, oh, okay, go on then. So I ran up ahead, right? Bear in mind, I'm like 8-9 pints down plus like wine, so I have no idea. I was quite drunk, right? And I shake both of their hands. I'm like, oh, you guys, can I just shake your hands? I'm just trying to do an experiment into, you know, like the human connection, that kind of thing, right? It's sort of really lame sort of stuff, right? But at the same time, the point that I made in the journal that I was reading was that those people aren't going to remember me, right? And I don't need to get super in my head about what other people are thinking of me, because they're total strangers and they don't matter, right? That was the idea. So you can have this little bit of fun. and introduce yourself to people. And you can talk to people because people are a lot more accepting and interesting and open to discussion than we all like to think. We all think of, you know, the world around us as being a very closed off place. But in reality, it's not. It's very open. It's just a case that you need to actually unwrap your present, right? If you just sit there with a box with wrapping paper on it and don't do anything with it, you're not going to know what's in the box. So you need to open the present to actually see what's inside. And that was kind of the idea. And I was reading through this, and this little like existential crisis that I've been having about, you know, oh, I've not really done anything interesting. You know, like I listen to stories from my family and like older friends I have that, you know, did crazy road trips all across America, or like, you know, went gallivanting across the world and like that kind of thing. And they did so much, and I've just sort of stayed here in England, right? Just sort of wasting away, you know? And I started to get myself down about that. And that's kind of why I started reading this journal entries, because I knew that that was an interesting story in there. I remembered that book launch. It was really like, just because it's a weird scenario that you don't find yourself in very often. And it's those little weird scenarios that are what make life so interesting, right? There's another one. I was out with a mate, and we went to get some dinner somewhere at this pub in Wandsworth, right? And I thought that they'd paid, and they thought that I'd paid, right? And we ended up leaving, and we got like 3 streets down, and then we realised that neither of us had paid. And then we looked around, and we were a little bit sort of stoned and stuff, and we kind of got a bit anxious that like the bar people were going to like come and track us down, right? So we started to make our way back to the bar so that we could actually pay, right? And we ended up going a different way to the bar than which we came, because we thought we could take a shortcut. The shortcut turned out to not work, and it took us down the street that we'd not seen before. And we walked past this big stately home, and there was this guy that was sat in the front garden by a little waterfall with like you know those dolphin waterfalls where the water comes out the mouth, right? He was sat on the little rim around that, smoking a pipe. He was an old man, probably about 75, right? And he started talking to us and asking us like how we're doing, blah, 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 blah. And we kind of went along with it, and we were saying, yeah, we're doing good, how are you? And it's like, yeah, I'm not too bad. And eventually the conversation led to him inviting us in, right? So we go inside, a little bit nervous, because like, you know, we're just going into some stranger's home here. And we get inside, and it's huge, this place. I cannot emphasize just how big it was. Right? It's a stately home. And there was like these Roman legionary statues all like along the walls, like what looked like original Renaissance era paintings just on the walls, stuff like that. And I did get the sense that this was all genuine stuff, because the way that this guy talked about history was so, like it was something that was really clearly passionate about, and something that he'd been studying for probably 50 more years, right? He takes us out to this little greenhouse out the back, where he's got this huge garden of crops. He's growing so many crops, almost like a mini farm, where he's got, you know, his carrots and his peppers and, you know, courgettes and stuff like that. And he's growing all this stuff in this greenhouse, right? And then he starts telling us about this time that he bought a church in like 1975. And he bought this derelict church, and he did it up, and he turned it into his own little religious sect. And he used the church, and he brought people in to this church, and then started teaching them his own little religion, right? And we were sort of following along, and I asked him about his little religion, and his religion was kind of, it was a weird mishmash of sort of Buddhism combined with like, I'm not really sure. Like there was some Native American sort of influence in there, a bit of pagan influence in there, a bit of Zoroastrianism. It was just a huge, weird mishmash of different religions that this guy sort of cobbled together as his worldview, and was in this church spouting it off to a load of other people, right? And I found that really, and he was showing me photos of it, and as in the process of him doing it up and that kind of thing. I thought it was really interesting what was going on here, right? And you know, when I tell that story, it sounds a lot more interesting than it actually was, because in that moment, I was bored to tears, and I kind of wanted to leave, and I was sort of worried about, you know, I wanted to get back to the bar so that I could pay. I was thinking like, I'm going to get arrested here, right? And, you know, I didn't really want to be in this like, scenario talking about all this stuff. I didn't really want to be drinking this guy's tea, because the tea that he made was like really like milky white, and I like my tea to be a bit stronger, you know? And so I got thinking about a lot of the crazy stories that people have told me, like, you know, stealing motorbikes, or getting kicked out of Spain, or like gallivanting across the world, meeting weird, you know, people, or taking that ayahuasca out in Peru or whatever. And I was thinking about, you know, the people that are doing these things and thinking they're probably having the same sort of thing where there's little, you know, anxieties or miseries or like things that get in the way of the enjoyment, the fulfillment of the anecdote in the moment of you actually doing it, right? Like when I was talking to that guy that ran this big stately home, I was kind of like not enjoying myself, but I enjoy telling the story as if I was enjoying myself because it's an interesting story. I think it was a weird thing that doesn't normally happen to me. I don't tend to just get invited into the random people's stately homes, you know? I don't tend to do that. I don't tend to end up being lectured about how this guy bought a church and ended up using it to spout his own religion off, you know? That's not something that's normal, right? But in the moment, I wasn't necessarily enjoying it. And that can be applied to, you know, a lot of things. A lot of stories that you get told that are made out like it was the best thing ever probably weren't that great, because it's the same way, you know, you go on social media, right? And they say, don't take social media as if like it's real life. And you hear people saying, you know, you scroll down Instagram, whatever, and you see people like this, all out in like, you know, Dubai or whatever, and surrounded by rich people and like all this kind of stuff. Oh, look at me, I'm at this crazy, you know, penthouse party. Oh, look at me, I'm on the pool by the hotel and all that sort of stuff. You know, if you actually saw them in that moment, it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting, right? And they say that about social media, but I think it also applies to real life, to people that tell you stories, because a lot of people like to bullshit and like to make out like their lives are more interesting than they really are, right? I feel like probably a lot of people that watch these videos think that my life is more interesting than it really is, you know? All I do is I just go out and talk in the woods and stuff like that and just try and have a bit of fun, you know, spouting off really. That's all it is. Maybe I'm doing the same thing where I'm trying to almost boast about how interesting my life is when really it's not. But at the same time, I think everyone has differing degrees of that self-awareness that can be a bit debilitating, right? And I just think that it's interesting to take note and to recognize that your life is more interesting than you've given it credit for. If you look back at like various anecdotes and stuff from the past, right? And you maybe have a conversation with someone you remember from primary school or elementary school, whatever, right? And you start talking to them and you haven't seen them in a while, you'll start to see that you're remembering stories that you didn't remember and that you haven't thought about for a long, long time. And, you know, names will come up that you go, oh God, Graham, what happened to Graham? You know, oh, bloody, I forgot about him. We used to go do this crazy thing together and that kind of stuff, right? And you know what? I'm now at a state where I can look back at my life and go, all right, I am content with what I did. And I say that as if I'm about to fucking die, but like I'm content with the story of the trajectory of my evolution from child to adult. I'm content with it. I'm happy with it, right? And it's very easy to get yourself down by comparing yourself to others, by you know, seeing that other people have more interesting lives, which, you know, doesn't necessarily mean, you know, anything in particular. It just means that, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side. You know, if I had their life, I'd probably be wishing for my life. If I had my life, I'd probably be wishing. I am wishing for their life. So, you know, there's no winning at the end of the day. There's nothing that you could do that will make you completely content all the time, right? There's no amount of, you know, like Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, they went to the moon and then they came back and they were depressed because, like, what, you're going to top that? There's nothing left to do after that. You've done the greatest thing ever. But any of us, we'd love to go to the moon. Say if it was not that difficult, right? And it, you know, didn't involve like life, you know, defying sort of, you know, risking your life and stuff, I'd love to do that. But at the same time, I wouldn't, because then I'd get back and I'd think, oh God, now I've been to the moon, what am I going to do next? I mean, you know, gallivanting around Australia and the world and stuff like that doesn't really compare to going to the moon. So I guess that's it, you know, whatever. So I hope that made some level of sense, that all you need to do is just accept your past for what it is, right? And who you are is who you are because of your past. And you are more interesting and more kind-hearted and more genuine and more passionate and loving than you could ever give yourself credit for. Because it's very easy to get yourself down, very easy to put yourself down and to doubt yourself when you don't need to doubt yourself. You're fine, you're all right. You're just as, you know, good and interesting and important as everybody else. We all have our own story that takes us here, and we all have our own futures. And it's just about bridging the gap from the past to the future, and we do that via the present. And all we can do in the present is make our lives as interesting as possible. Go out there into the world, try and engage with the world, try and get yourself out of your comfort zone, try and do stuff that makes you fulfilled and content and happy, right? I know that's very difficult. I know that a lot of people sort of don't know what they want. I don't necessarily know what I want. I don't know what makes me content and fulfilled. I just keep throwing the dart at the dartboard and seeing what, you know, eventually I'll get a bullseye or triple 60. And yeah, that's kind of the video. I hope that made some level of sense. I hope that you kind of took something out of that. And yeah, let me know what you think about, you know, your story, your life story. Are you content with who you are and what you did in the time that you've been allotted? Are you happy with where you are now, considering your past, right? And this is, I'm talking about positive experiences from the past. I'll probably do another video about negative stuff. And we could do this whole video a bit sort of in reverse. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on all of that, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye. And I'm gonna close this out by sort of just doing that. This isn't very nice. Am I meant to like keep my feet on the ground? No, I think I'm meant to keep my feet up. Something like that.